Tram Stop. This bedtime story takes you to a small tram shelter wrapped in vines beside a quiet suburban track. We will spend some time here together, watching the lights, listening to the rails, and exploring all the calm little details that surround this tiny place. The tram stop sits just off a narrow side street where the houses thin out and the gardens stretch a little wider before giving way to open ground. The track runs straight here. 2 silver lines set in a bed of pale gravel, with small weeds growing bravely between the stones. The shelter itself is no bigger than a garden shed, a simple rectangle of wood and glass huddled close to the rails. Ivy and climbing vines have claimed most of its walls, spilling over the roof in soft curtains of green. At the front, a clear pane of glass looks out over the track, its edges fogged with tiny scratches from years of weather. The paint on the wooden frame was once a bright blue, but now it has faded into a gentle, washed-out sky colour. Beneath the shelter, concrete ground spreads in a neat rectangle, dotted with old gunspots and a few fallen leaves that no one swept away. A narrow bench runs along the back wall, its wooden slats worn smooth and shiny in the middle, where people sit most often. There is a timetable pinned up on the side, the paper rippled from past rain. Numbers and place names aligned in tidy rows. Above it, a single lamp is fixed to the roof, still off for now, waiting for the light to fade. At one corner of the shelter, a drain pipe runs down from the roof and disappears into the ground. The vines have wrapped around it, tiny tendrils hooked into the rough paint, using it as a ladder. A spider has built a small web in the angle where the pipe meets the wall, a neat triangle that shivers whenever the evening breeze turns slightly colder. Along the base of the shelter, where the concrete meets the soil, moss has begun to grow in a soft green line. The moss looks like a narrow pillow, pressed gently against the wall, damp and plush to the eye. If you kneel down, you can see how many different shades of green live there. Some bright, like new leaves, others dark and almost black. A handful of ants are using the edge of the moss as a highway, moving in both directions with patient purpose. One carries a fragment of crumb almost as big as itself, walking steadily along the seam between moss and stone. From this low angle, the whole shelter looks tall, like a quiet hill covered in plants, standing guard beside the rails. Just beyond the tram stop, the track curves slightly, enough that the lines seem to lean together in the distance. Between the rails, small patches of grass have pushed their way through the gravel. Their blades are thin and flexible, bending whenever a breeze comes down the line. On either side of the track, there is a narrow strip of wild ground, separating it from the houses and the street. Hardy plants have taken advantage of this space, growing wherever they can. There are clumps of tall grass, some dry and straw-coloured, some still green and soft. A few stubborn daisies have opened white petals around bright yellow centres, even though the sun is already lowering. In one patch, a bush of tiny purple flowers glows faintly against the darker leaves around it. Every little cluster of plants seems to mark a memory of a seed that fell here, found just enough soil and water, and decided to stay. Above the shelter, the sky is slowly changing. Earlier, it was a clear, pale blue, but now the light is sliding toward evening, and soft colours linger at the horizon. Thin clouds stretch across the sky like brushed chalk lines, their edges lit in gentle orange and pink. Far overhead, a passenger jet moves silently at first, a tiny silver shape, drawing a faint white line behind it that gradually frays and dissolves. A few birds are still awake, cutting arcs across the open air. A pair of swallows flit after invisible insects, changing direction so quickly they look like soft black darts. A single crow lands on the electric cable above the track, its claws gripping the wire securely as it settles and looks around. The cable hums very gently, not a sound so much as a presence, a subtle vibration that seems to hang over the shelter. The crow ruffles its feathers, then stares down at the tram stop for a moment, head tilted, before losing interest and turning to scan the field nearby. The sky is wide here, and as it dims, the tiny shelter seems smaller, cozier, tucked in under the spreading dome of the coming night. Inside the shelter, the air feels a little cooler. The vines cover enough of the walls that the light enters in filtered stripes, creating soft patterns on the bench and floor. One of the glass panels has a long crack running across it, but the pieces still hold together, like a puzzle that no one has taken apart. Someone has wiped a small circle in the dust near eye level, a clean patch where the outside view is crisp and clear. Through that circle, you can see the track and the gravel and the low line of plants, framed almost like a picture. The bench is just wide enough for 2 people, and the wood curves very slightly where bodies have pressed against it over the years. On one end, a cluster of initials has been carved clumsily into the slat, some deep and some barely visible. The shelter smells faintly of old wood, damp leaves, and the metallic scent of rails whenever a tram has passed recently. When you sit here, time seems to move at the pace of the timetable on the wall, quiet and measured. On the opposite side of the track, a narrow path runs parallel, laid out in uneven concrete slabs. The slabs tilt gently in different directions, following the soft movement of the earth beneath. Between them, thin lines of soil host tiny plants that no one planted on purpose. Here, a sprig of clover spreads its 3-leaf clusters flat, catching what remains of the light. There, a little fern has unfurled delicate fronds, each leaflet textured with fine ridges. Rust-colored lichen decorates a few of the stones, painting them in irregular circles and patches. A bicycle stands propped against a nearby fence, locked through its frame to a metal bar. Its front basket is empty, except for a stray leaf and a folded supermarket receipt. The back wheel carries a light dusting of mud on the tire, proof of recent rides along the wetter parts of the street. The path leads onward, past the radar of the shelter, disappearing toward other stops and other corners of the neighborhood. Yet here, beside the tram stop, it is quiet and waiting. At the far end of the platform, a small sign shows the name of this station. The letters are simple and black, printed on a white background with a thin border of chipped green paint around the edge. The sign is fixed to a metal pole that has rusted a little near the bottom, where rainwater tends to collect. Someone has wrapped a thin strip of reflective tape around it, bright when a headlight passes, dull and grey now in the evening light. At the base of the pole, a plastic bottle lies on its side, caught in the grass, its label mostly peeled away. Next to it, a single dandelion has gone to seed, its round head a fragile globe of ready-to-fly parachutes. If you breathe out gently toward it, you can imagine the seeds lifting away one by one, floating over the track and down into the wild ground beyond. The sign stands quietly above all this small activity, doing its simple job without any fuss, marking this place on maps and in the memory of people who ride these trams every day. Back at the shelter, the lamp above the timetable flickers and then comes on, casting a soft halo of warm light on the glass and wood. Moths are quick to notice. A small one with pale wings appears first, fluttering in hesitant circles before settling on the glass surface. Soon another joins, darker, with a fine speckled pattern on its wings, like grains of rice scattered on fabric. They tap against the glass gently, not in panic, just in repeated, curious movements toward the glow. Their shadows dance on the paper of the timetable, making some of the numbers ripple and shift. The lamp hums faintly, a steady sound that blends with the tiny electric buzz of the overhead lines. The vines near the lamp look almost black now, their leaves sharp-edged silhouettes against the yellow light. Inside the shelter, the bench and floor are washed with a soft rectangle of brightness, like a quiet island floating in the darkening evening. Outside the pool of light, the track and the plants retreat into deeper shades of blue and grey. A tram approaches long before it arrives. First comes the low, distant hum carried along the rails, a vibration that trembles slightly through the shelter floor. Then there is a faint glimmer of light on the curve of the track, a small glow that grows steadily brighter. The sound becomes clearer, the gentle whir of motors, the soft click of wheels crossing joints in the rail. When the tram finally pulls into view, its windows shine like a moving string of frames, each one showing a little slice of life inside. You can see people sitting with their hands in their laps, a child leaning sleepily against a parent, an older man looking calmly out at the passing houses. The tram glides toward the stop, slowing until it comes to a smooth halt, almost level with the tiny shelter. Doors open with a soft hiss. Warm light spills out onto the platform, mixing with the cooler glow of the shelter lamp. For a moment, the shelter, the vines, the moths, and the passengers are all part of the same small, bright moment. A woman steps off the tram, holding a cloth bag against her hip. She pauses for a second to adjust the strap on her shoulder, then turns toward the shelter. The bag is full, but not heavy. You can see the rounded shapes of vegetables pressing softly against the fabric. A loaf of bread wrapped in paper. The long green tops of spring onions poking out. She walks to the bench and sits down, exhaling the kind of long breath that comes at the end of a day. Her shoes are worn at the heels, the leather softened and shaped by the way she walks. A strand of hair escapes from her bun and brushes against her cheek, and she tucks it back absently as she looks at the timetable. Even though she seems to know these times by heart. For a minute or two, she just rests there, listening to the tram depart, watching the moths trace their little paths around the lamp. Then, when the hum of the tram fades down the line, she stands, lifts her bag, and takes the small path toward the houses, leaving the shelter empty again. After she goes, a cat appears from behind the base of the shelter, squeezing through the gap between the vines and the wall. Its fur is mottled grey and white, with a darker patch over one eye that looks almost like a little mask. The cat moves with practiced ease around the feet of the bench, sniffing at the corners where interesting smells might linger. It jumps up onto the seat, tail flicking lazily, and sits for a while facing the track. Its ears swivel whenever a distant sound reaches them. A voice from a nearby garden, the slam of a car door somewhere down the street. The cat seems comfortable here, as if this bench is just another part of its evening territory. After a while, it lies down, paws tucked neatly under its chest, eyes half closed. In the glow of the shelter lamp, its whiskers catch the light like fine silver wires. When a slight gust moves the vines and makes the leaves brush lightly against the roof, the cat's eyes open for a moment, watching, then close again. Eventually, it slips silently back down and disappears into the tall grass beside the track, as quietly as it arrived. The soundscape around the tram stop shifts as night comes on. Earlier, there were soft traffic noises from the nearby street and the distant murmur of voices from open windows. Now those sounds have softened or drifted away, replaced by quieter ones. A cricket starts up in the field beyond the track, its chirping steady and bright against the darker air. Somewhere closer, another insect replies in a slightly different rhythm, weaving a pattern of sound between the pauses. Leaves whisper together whenever the breeze moves through the vines and the bushes along the fence line. You can hear the gentle creak of the shelter roof as it cools. Tiny sounds of wood contracting, almost like sighs. Every once in a while, a tram passes without stopping. A rushing glow that fills the track for a moment and then moves on, leaving the night even quieter behind it. The rails keep a faint metallic echo of each journey, a memory that fades slowly back into stillness. Across the street from the tram stop, a row of houses watches quietly. Their windows are lit here and there, rectangles of yellow and soft white floating on the dark facades. In one window, a television flickers, colours shifting and flashing in silent patterns from this distance. In another, someone sits at a table under a hanging lamp, their head bent toward a book or a notebook, hand moving slowly across the surface. A balcony on the second floor has a string of small lights clipped to the rail, each bulb making a tiny circle of brightness, like beads threaded through the air. A potted tree sits at one corner of the balcony, its leaves catching the glow and showing brief flashes of green. A curtain stirs behind a half-open window, letting in the night air. These houses lean toward the tram stop in a quiet way, close enough that the faint bell of an arriving tram is part of their evening sounds, as familiar as running water and clinking dishes. Back at the track, the gravel holds the coolness of the night. The stones are mixed shades of grey and off-white, some smooth and rounded, others jagged along one edge. When the tram wheels pass over them, the vibrations ripple through this bed of stones and then settle again. Along the edge where the gravel meets the concrete of the platform, a few stray objects have gathered. There is a small, bright blue bottle cap, its ridged sides filled with a little rainwater from earlier in the week. A thin twig lies beside it, stripped of leaves, its surface slightly glossy in the lamplight. Near the shelter, a fallen leaf from a nearby tree rests with its veins clearly visible, like a small map pressed flat against the ground. These are simple, ordinary things, and yet here in the quiet, they seem to have a kind of gentle weight, each one exactly where it has ended up after a day of wind and footsteps and passing trams. Sometimes, late in the evening, no one comes for a while. The shelter stands empty, the bench bare, the tiny web by the drain pipe catching bits of dust instead of insects. In those moments, the tram stop feels almost like a small room that belongs to the night itself. The lamp burns steadily, drawing its circle on the floor, and the vines sway now and then in the breeze that sneaks in through the open side. Far down the track, a red signal light shines, steady and patient, reflected faintly in the polished surface of the rails. The air cools just a little more, bringing out the smells of damp soil and stone, and the faint metallic scent of the overhead cables. A single bird, late to settle, flies overhead and disappears into a dark tree beyond the houses. The tram stop does not move or change much, but it is never completely still. Tiny shifts, tiny sounds, tiny lives go on around it.